Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's screening of The Ants and the Grasshopper. My name is Avery Davis Lamb, and I'm a co-executive director of Creation Justice Ministries. The mission of Creation Justice Ministries is to educate, equip, and mobilize Christians and Christian institutions to protect, restore, and rightly share God's creation. We're delighted to be showing this visionary, grounded film, and our hope is that it might inspire regenerative action from us all in the face of the creation crises. The film tonight is about an hour and 15 minutes long, and after the curtain drops, we are delighted to have a conversation with filmmaker Raj Patel, our very own Karen Bigelow, and that conversation will be facilitated by Creation Justice Ministries seminary intern Colette Healy. Please, throughout the program tonight, as you think of questions for our panelists, if questions come up for you while you're watching the film, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Ask that you please use the Q&A function rather than the chat function, because we might lose it in the chat function, and we certainly would rather watch the film than read the chat. Before we get started here today, I ask that you will join me in prayer. We have a prayer of call and response here today. So please participate by reading the italicized "Lord, hear our prayer" after I read out the other part of the prayer. So please join me. God of seed time and harvest, have mercy on us and hear our prayer. For children who go to bed hungry at night, and for parents who cannot find food for them, Lord, hear our prayer. For communities hungry because of flood, fire, or drought, and for governments who struggle to provide for them, Lord, hear our prayer. For farmers sowing seed and raising livestock to feed the world, and for their care for the land that provides their livelihood, Lord, hear our prayer. For subsistence farmers vulnerable to climate changes, and for market gardeners vulnerable to price variations, Lord, hear our prayer. For those who are committed to organic farming practices, Lord, hear our prayer. For the well-being and ethical treatment of livestock, and for those who raise, transport, and slaughter animals for food, Lord, hear our prayer. For soup kitchens, food banks, and aid agencies, and for the donors, volunteers, and staff who help feed the hungry, Lord, hear our prayer. For remote communities where fresh food is expensive and in short supply, Lord, hear our prayer. For policymakers and planners in land use and food production, and for community educators in diet and nutrition, Lord, hear our prayer. Gather us into your heavenly feast, where all who hunger and thirst for justice will be satisfied. Amen. The prayer we just prayed together comes from Creation Justice Ministries' free Earth Day Sunday resource for congregations that focuses this year on agriculture. The title of that resource is Sowing Seeds. In many ways, this event tonight is a preview of Earth Month, when we encourage Christian communities to take seriously the call to sow seeds, both physically and spiritually, through engaging in prayer and action. Our resource this year is intended to be a guide and a companion in that work. We'll put a link down in the chat so that you can download that resource for yourself and share it with your communities. Tonight's screening is made possible in part by Peace is Loud, but it's also made possible through you all. I want to say that to provide resources like the Earth Day Sunday resource and spaces like the event tonight for reflection and action on creation justice, we rely on financial support from people of faith just like you. And a really helpful way to give is to join the Creation Justice Partners, which is our monthly giving community. We like to think that monthly donations are sort of the regenerative agriculture of giving. They don't just make our work possible, they make our work better. Through monthly giving, we're more resilient, we're more creative, and we're more effective as an organization when we have reliable funding from monthly donations. So we would like to invite you all to join the Creation Justice Partners, and we'll put a link in the chat for more information. You can also sign up on our website. And thank you for all that you do to support our work, and thank you for those who have already donated to make this screening tonight possible. With that introduction, it's time to get the film rolling. So thanks for being here, and I'll start the screening here.
Thank you all so much for coming tonight. I hope you all love the film as much as I do. I'm Colette, a student at Egan Theological Seminary and an intern at Creation Justice Ministries. I'll be facilitating the Q&A tonight. I'm honored to be joined tonight by a director of the film, Raj Patel, and by Karen Bigelow, co-executive director at Creation Justice Ministries. I've prepared a few questions for you, and so has the audience. So, moving right into that, Raj, you called the film The Ants and the Grasshopper. What did you intend to convey by naming the film something so reminiscent of the famous Aesop's fable?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, everyone, for being here this evening. And Colette, thank you so much for facilitating this conversation. It's such an honor to be here. The title isn't mine, and it isn't actually a reference to the Aesop's fable. It was Anita's idea, and she's referring to something that isn't about the ants and the grasshopper in the Aesop's fable variety, but is of that one little scene that you see where the ants are lifting the grasshopper. And she mentions it in passing, where what she's saying is, together, we may seem small, but together we can achieve great things and lift great things if we all pull together. And that was a reflection not just on the politics of possibility, but also what she was seeing in America. She was seeing that, we are so many ants, but yet we refuse to lift the grasshopper. And so, we were using her words because, honestly, initially I was narrating the film and I was sort of driving things. And it was a disaster because in essence, I was just a sort of woke David Attenborough, sort of saying, well, here we are in Malawi among the Malawians and they're smashing patriarchy. And no one needs my voice when Anita's voice is so much more powerful, and the title was hers to give, and she gave that. So that's why the film has the title that it does, and how it's sort of an indictment of us, of how we have failed so far to lift the grasshopper.
Thank you so much for that explanation. That's beautiful. So this next question is for Karen. In the film, we hear Anita say, we live in a world where people believe lies. They believe the poor cannot teach the rich, or that Black people cannot teach white people, or women teach men. So how powerful is that force of bigotry preventing us from moving forward on environmental policy, like as a globe? And what can we as Christians do to overcome and counter this bigotry?
I really think bigotry is at its core what's stopping most of the progress that we have in society, including in environmental progress or even ending hunger as a related topic to this documentary. And I think part of it is because sometimes in our policy, especially in the US, our policymakers, sometimes it's not always equitable or equal in who gets to be saved in some respects. And so the US has seen so many parts of the world impacted by climate, and yet there hasn't been even a mandate to make climate a reason why people can migrate to the US. There's no such thing as being a climate refugee still. But then there's also other things. We see war and conflict and other things happen, and many of which nowadays have an underlying issue related to something related to climate. And yet we still don't see anything happening. But yet when we see stuff, wars happening, like the war happening against Ukraine, which rightfully so, they've gotten the support around the world that they should have, but we have not given the same priority to other parts of the world, non-European nations that also need the same support when devastating moments happen, whether it's conflict that has been has an underlying cause related to climate issues, or when we've seen issues more directly, like natural disasters. And so bigotry, I think, is a big part of why we haven't really prioritized the issues, because I think sometimes, whether they'll say it or not, the people who need the most support right now are often the people who are not always deemed worthy of the support. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question? What can we do as Christians, was it?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I think part of it as Christians in particular is that we have to put a value in knowing, as Christians, we believe that we are all made in the image of God. And even though we know that we're all made in the image of God, we also know that we're not all treated as if we're made in the image of God. And I think it's important that we really see that as a value, but also make sure that our actions follow up with that. And so in the documentary, there were multiple times of like, we can't change a system, or we would have to change our whole lives in order for this to happen. And why not? Why aren't other people deemed valuable and made in the image of God and worthy of those changes? Not just for ourselves, but for future generations, but also those who are around the world. And so I think a big part of it is that as Christians, we have to make sure that our actions are reflective of valuing everyone being made in the image of God. And also that means valuing the God that is also in non-humans, the God that is in the trees, the God that is in the rest of creation. And that means that we have to have choices, be it in how we live, but also how we vote and how we do advocacy, that then supports understanding that we're all made in that image, and that bigotry is not acceptable in any form.
Thank you so much. That's such a powerful thing to talk about and to spread the message on. Thank you. So this next question will go to Raj. Your biography states that you've been tear gassed on 4 different continents while protesting the World Bank and the World Trade Organization. Meanwhile, in the documentary, Anita has been described as a missionary. Her activism involves changing people's perspectives directly through testimony, and I'd say the film does the same thing. And I think both of those are very godly acts. So my question is, I see 2 very different but very crucial types of protest. One which seeks to change policy and one which seeks to change culture. So is one of the 2 more important in your eyes when it comes to environmental justice, changing policy or changing culture? And the second part of the question is, does that need to happen? Does one need to happen in order for the other to be successful?
What a great question, Colette. And I mean, I think the answer is that both need to happen at the same time. Because unless we have the kind of culture shift that Karen was talking about, then we can have half-hearted policy that then gets swiped back, with the next change of administration, and the changes that are made are much less transformative than they need to be. I do think that it's important to put our bodies on the gears of the machine because we're so close to it here. For Anita, Anita wanted policy change. She wanted to meet with everyone at the USDA and EPA and State Department and USAID, and she wanted to meet with the president. And you see at the end that she was quite frustrated that no one would talk to her. Well, because they understood her theory of change, which is if you go to someone's doorstep with your problem, they cannot ignore you, and they just didn't want her on their doorstep. So, I mean, protest is just another way of doing what Anita was doing when people won't let you in. I mean, I see our work very much as on a continuum where Anita does want us to change our policy. She does want us to become activists for climate change, whatever that means in our particular context. And every context is going to be a little bit different. But she also, she joined a protest, in fact, outside the White House. You see a little bit of that at the end, because that, meeting people where they are, whether they're on the insides of the halls of power or on the outside, is her MO, because she can change people's minds about very big things. And I think that's I was just noticing a question in our chat about the sort of small things that we can do to enact big change. And I think that might get it backwards. For Anita, it's the big changes that we have to do in order to be able to make the small ones happen. Anita's very big on ending sexism, for example. I mean, Winston's transformation was not something that gets made up. That's a huge change. And you start with the intention that, of course, that's going to change. And then every day you do the small things to make it, to get him there. But you always begin with the intention, no, this is, we're living in a world where this kind of bigotry is not okay. And we recognize that that's the big change, and the small things happen after that to get us to the promised land. But I think that's Anita's vision, and I think we come from very different life worlds, but we meet in this place where we understand that that's actually the big things are what we need, because we've been fobbed off with the small things. We've been told, what, if you just drink through a metal straw, or you carry a tote bag, or you buy kale from the farmer's market, that's going to solve these big systemic problems. And I buy kale, I have a metal straw, I've got an electric bike, I'm hip. But I still think that these are reminders that you need to be doing the big thing, not the substitute for the big thing. And I think, again, Colette, this is just to situate this conversation in what Karen was talking about the big, the big blockages that stop us are the big things, and we have to do the big things in order to end them.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much. So the next couple of questions I have for you guys, either one of you can feel free to answer, whoever feels most moved to do so. These questions are also from the audience. So let's see, in the film, one of the young farmers said that it isn't possible to change a whole system of agriculture. Is that true? And if so, what would it take? You want to take a stab?
Yeah, I can start. So it's very much possible to make those changes. We have seen more and more farmers use regenerative practices, farmers who have moved away from traditional practices that are more encouraged in industrial farming. And we also have seen many BIPOC farmers, Black, Indigenous, people of color, farmers who are already doing more sustainable practices, more regenerative practices. And so it's not like we don't have it in this country, but unfortunately, in order for the change to happen, as Raj was mentioning, those bigger things have to happen. And the bigger things is the policy changes. We have a government that has the ability to make investments to safeguard farmers, to take the risk of doing something different, to be able to move towards regenerative practices, to be able to move to supporting smaller scale farmers. Right now, the way that our policy is set up, people are literally incentivized to make bad farming practices. And it is not incentivized to do what's best for the planet, what's best for the soil, for the health of people and the planet. And so, but we have the ability to make those changes. We know what is necessary when it comes to our food system, whether it's to end hunger, whether it's to move towards better farming practices, but unfortunately we haven't had the political will to do so. And so change is possible, but in order for that to happen, we as Christians definitely have to advocate. We have to contact our members of Congress, especially as we see this farm bill coming up. that will be passed either this year or perhaps next year potentially. But we know that we have a farm bill coming up that can help to make us on track to really make the investments in those necessary changes. And just as a non-shameless plug, our 2023 Earth Day Sunday resource is focused, it's called Sowing Seeds, and it is focused on regenerative farming and how can churches really be advocates for this upcoming farm bill.
How exciting! I'm sorry, Colette. I just want to just register how utterly wonderful that is. There is a coalition of groups in Washington D.C. Really fighting for a transformative farm bill and a just farm bill. And I'm so excited that y'all might be allies and comrades in that in that struggle. So I do think that there is the possibility right now of a more just farm bill, laying the foundations now for the really transformative one 5 years from now. But I think this really feels like the first time that there is enough energy and organizing and coalition building across really different sectors to bring together the real just solution to the farm bill. Because you're absolutely right, Karen. I mean, the history of this country is shameful when it comes to agriculture. Dispossession of land and enslaved people have made this country what it was, and it really does feel like it would be a really big thing to undo that. And how difficult is that? Of course it's difficult. Because the best things are never easy. But that reckoning that we need to have in any case is a reckoning that also allows us to make sure that everyone in this country gets to eat well and that we survive the climate crisis. How good is that? So I do think that there is an opportunity in this farm bill, which feels like a very wonky thing to do, but I'm a wonk, what can you do? It's an opportunity to really, for all of us to put our shoulder to the wheel to become the kinds of activists that Anita is asking us to do.
Well, thank you both so much. That is great information to have, especially the resource about the Farm Bill. Thank you both. And, not to get off track, but like our society is so dependent on making money, so focused on making money. And my personal view has always been like, but you can make money through value-added products, through organic products that are grown sustainably. People will pay for that. What do you guys do? Would you guys agree that that's possible to make that transition in a way that is economically beneficial to the people that need it to be?
Sorry, I will go. Thank you. So I would say it is done. We've seen, again, in the Earth Day Sunday resource, we spoke with Ray Archuleta, who is a regenerative farmer, and he has been able to show that there is a model and there is the possibility that farmers in the US can have better regenerative practices. They can do what's best for the planet, for the animals, for the soil. They can do what's best and not lose money. And also, I would also add that currently a lot of farmers, even in using industrial practices, they are not profitable. Many of them are not making the money necessary for this to be to their benefit. So even with the argument of like, this wouldn't be financially feasible, and it's like, it's currently not working, the system that we have. And so moving towards a more regenerative practice, there is more promise in that. We've seen farmers who are now showing that it can be profitable, especially with the right support and engagement in order to do so. But yeah, it's currently not working. And so we know that it can work though with regenerative farming. And so there's really a possibility of not just how can we better the planet and through our agriculture system, but also how can we have more livable wages for farmers, which frankly is not happening at the rate that it should currently.
And I think you're absolutely right, Karen. But and Leola in the chat has pointed to another flaw in the system around farming, which is that for small and sustainable farming, the playing field is so tilted against doing the right thing that small and low sales farms have negative income. In 2018, about half of the 2 million farms reported negative income, and the very smallest farms are have an average income of negative $1,400 last year. So this is only it's only possible for people to survive by going off farm. And I take your point, Colette, that having value-added products is a great way to survive that. But it's surviving by hanging on by your fingernails. It's in the same way that fair trade, for example, is much better than unfair trade. And so if you buy fair trade coffee, that's a good thing. I buy fair trade coffee, but I don't imagine that these small kinds of value add that give farmers a couple more cents per pound for their coffee is in any way transforming their lives. What we need is the bigger structural change to be able to level the playing field. So the farmers who are sequestering carbon, who are fostering biodiversity, who are making sure that workers are treated well on farms, which is it's a huge problem in American farming that so many workers of color are treated as disposable and whose lives matter so little. Even in the pandemic, we saw how little agricultural workers' lives mattered so that we could get our cheap groceries. Well, imagine what it would be like to treat workers as fellow human beings. Again, this gets back to Karen's point. That would require much more expensive food. And people are like, oh no, well, we can't have expensive food. We've got so many poor people in the United States. But people are poor not because they're not working, but because they are working at very poorly paid jobs. 7 out of the 10 worst paying jobs in America are in the food system. If we want to end hunger, we have to recognize that actually wages need to rise because people are adding value every day. They're just not securing the value for themselves. The value is being stolen by large corporations. So if we recognize that actually we need to level the playing field towards justice, economic justice, if we recognize that actually food probably will get more expensive, but the way to tackle that is not to suddenly go back to cheap food, but to recognize that people need dignity on their plates and that costs money and we should pay for it. We can't just continue being a rich country with lots of poor people in it, or rather a poor country with a few billionaires, which is what America is. We need to understand that actually we need justice on our plates. And that means leveling the playing field, not just so we can value regenerative agriculture, but so that everyone gets to eat well in America. And so even today, we've got 35 million people who are food insecure, and we'll have 1 in 2 children at some point in their lives will depend on subsidized meals. This is a travesty when we've got so much wealth in this country concentrated in the hands of so few, for whom all of us are adding value.
I would also add to that a big reason why certain foods are so affordable is because of subsidies by the USDA, the Department of Agriculture. And so I guess for me, a part of me feels like, why can't we redistribute where a lot of that goes? And so again, instead of incentivizing bad practices in farming and monocrops, a lack of biodiversity on the farm, why can't we also use those same funds to subsidize good farming practices, biodiversity, healthy soil, things that will be able to kind of help offset those costs that Raj is talking about, because it will cost more to actually value people on a farm. It will cost more to not frivolously use resources. However, at the same time, it's not like we don't have a current structure or model that shows that we can subsidize prices. We can also give safety nets to farmers so that certain things are not as costly. And so why can't we do that with more healthier foods, do that with farmers who are doing the better practices and who are conserving more energy and water?
As a very, very small farmer myself, that sounds like the dream. Thank you guys so much. And I really like that phrase, dignity on your plate. It speaks to me. So let's see, another audience member said, I am so impressed that the families you filmed were somewhat aware of justice and even people of faith who cared for the land. What role did Anita's faith play in educating the Americans about the injustice of climate change?
I can jump into that just a little bit to observe that the family who perhaps traveled the least in the arc of this film, Trisha and Ed, was still ready to listen to Anita, even though politically I think that they were quite far apart, because Anita was not coming in having pre-blamed them for anything. I mean, I think a lot of the discourse on climate change is, as Trisha said, people in suits coming in with an agenda, and that agenda is to blame farmers for everything. And the language of faith allowed Anita to do an end run around some of that, and to have instead a theological discussion. But the theological discussion is still a tough one, because essentially the question then became, well, is this God's will or isn't it? And if it is God's will, what's our duty then, to one another and to creation? Is it to let creation burn as per our interpretation of God's will, or is God's will for us to live with, to understand what we have done to creation and do something better with it? That's all of a sudden that's the theological discussion that we found, or Anita found herself in, and I thought that in some way was another way of framing the discussion that we find ourselves in other political moments, but in a way that I think was much more compelling, and where people didn't feel like they were being spoken down to, because a lot of the climate change discourse is, either you get it or you're stupid, and that already prevents any sort of reasonable discussion. Whereas I thought Anita's theological approach made it possible for her to do, incredible jujitsu, like with Winston, where, not many people read Genesis and think of that as a feminist tract. But that's what Anita did. She took Genesis and she said, well, look, here's what we understand God understands by gender equality. Why aren't you doing that? And that's that kind of discussion plus organizing makes incredible things happen. So I thought, in terms of persuading Winston, I think she was successful there, because not only did we catch on camera at the time where she confronted him, but there were all these other times where other neighbors were going around and showing Winston how to be a better man. And I think that had there been the same kind of organizing force with Trisha and Ed, their journey might have been a little bit different. But one conversation is not enough to get people on the road. I think that, again, Esther called it out when she said, Jordan, that guy, the guy who was like entrenched and was like fighting back, he was the guy who was going to change first, because actually to be in denial is to be along the road of transformation. Gandhi is attributed with the idea that first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. When people are fighting you, you've gone through the denial and the laughing at, and now they're in the fighting with, and then soon you'll win. So I think what we need to be doing is just working every day with the folk who are either ignoring us or laughing at us, until they get into the zone of engaging with us, because we know that that's a sign that we carry on organizing to be able to get to the victory in which they are our colleagues as opposed to our enemies.
Thank you so much. Do you have anything to add to that, Karen?
No, I think Raj said everything that needs to be said.
Well, I think it's about time to wrap up. So I just want to say thank you so much, Raj and Karen. Thanks for being here and answering some questions for us. You guys have been amazing tonight. I'm so grateful for all the work you both do for our planet and for our future. Now I'll turn it back to Avery for his closing remarks.
Thanks again. Thanks again to Karen and Raj. Colette, thank you for facilitating this panel. Everyone's welcome to comment in the chat or with an emoji function, just celebrating the wise words that we've heard from Karen and Raj. Raj, thank you for sharing Anita's story with us, for bringing that to ears in the United States, including ours, that desperately need to hear this message. And my prayer is that the seeds will fall on fertile soil here, and that we will indeed take action from what we've heard here tonight. So thank you. And to share with you all here, The Ants and the Grasshopper is available for screening. So if you'd like to host a screening at your congregation, I think I saw a few folks ask about that, you can send in a screening inquiry at antsandgrasshopper.org, or follow the link in the chat that we can drop down there in just a second. Also, I will say on the website, There are discussion guides that are specifically made for use in churches, and the folks who worked on this team have done a phenomenal job of pulling together those discussion guides. And I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, for hanging out with us for 2 hours on a Tuesday night to hear this message. As you reflect on your experience tonight, we ask that you please stay connected with Creation Justice Ministries. Download Sowing Seeds, talk in your congregation about regenerative agriculture and the Farm Bill. And if you are willing and able to support our work with monthly gifts as part of our Creation Justice Partners program, we would love your support. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. Blessings, and you have a good night. Bye.